You've never thought about what it means to be caged for 23 hours a day. Not really. You've heard the phrase solitary confinement, maybe seen it in a movie, maybe nodded at a news headline before scrolling past, but you haven't felt what it does to a human brain when the only sound for weeks is the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echo of steel on steel. You haven't watched yourself slowly come apart at the seams, not from violence, not from pain, but from the absence of everything that makes a person a person. That's where this starts. Not in some distant country with a flag you can't place, right here, right now, in places that exist inside ordinary borders, operated by ordinary bureaucracies, funded by ordinary tax dollars. And if you think this has nothing to do with you, keep watching. Because the distance between your life and the inside of a punishment cell is smaller than any system wants you to believe. If you've ever wondered how modern societies justify cruelty while calling it justice, this is the kind of content that a Nick Pob was built for. Let's start with a number. 80,000. That's the approximate number of people held in solitary confinement on any given day in the United States alone. Some of them are there because they're genuinely dangerous. People who attack guards, organize violence inside, posed an ongoing threat that couldn't be managed any other way. But a significant portion of them are there for far thinner reasons. Possessing contraband, filing too many grievances, being labeled a gang member based on the tattoo on their forearm or the neighborhood they grew up in. Some are there because the facility is overcrowded and isolation is easier than management. And some are there because a corrections officer had a bad shift and checked a box. The cell is roughly 6 by 9 feet, smaller than most American bathrooms. You get 1 hour of outdoor recreation, though in many facilities, outdoor means a slightly larger concrete box with a mesh ceiling where you can see a rectangle of sky. You eat alone. You shower 3 times a week in a stall with a guard watching. You have no programming, no classes, no meaningful human contact. Phone calls are limited or non-existent. If you arrive psychologically stable, which many people do, psychiatrists estimate you begin showing symptoms of psychological deterioration within 72 hours. Not weeks, hours. Anxiety spikes, sleep fragments. Your sense of time dissolves. By the end of a month, a significant percentage of people in isolation are experiencing hallucinations. By 6 months, some are engaging in self-harm, not because they want to die, but because physical pain is the only sensation that confirms they're still real. And here is where the system's logic gets interesting, because it does have a logic. The argument is simple. Some behaviors can only be controlled through isolation. Removing a violent person from general population protects other inmates, protects staff, maintains order. And there's truth buried inside that argument. There are people in maximum security facilities who have committed acts of violence so severe, so calculated, that unrestricted access to other human beings creates genuine risk. The problem is that the tool designed for that narrow use case has been scaled into a management strategy applied to tens of thousands of people who don't meet that threshold. The exception became the rule. The emergency became the policy. And now you have a punishment so psychologically devastating that the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture has explicitly called prolonged solitary confinement, defined as more than 15 consecutive days, a form of torture. The United States remains one of the primary practitioners of it. But solitary is just the beginning. Move east, move across oceans. The map of harsh punishment gets darker the further you look. Saudi Arabia carried out 196 executions in 2022, the highest number recorded in at least 3 decades. The methods include beheading with a sword, which in some cases is followed by crucifixion, meaning the body is displayed publicly after death, mounted to wooden beams, left for hours as a message to witnesses. This is not historical practice. This happened in 2022. The offenses that carry the death penalty include drug trafficking, apostasy, adultery, and sorcery, a category that has been used to execute people for acts including faith healing and fortune-telling. The convictions often follow trials that human rights organizations have described as deeply flawed, including cases where confessions were obtained under duress and defendants had no access to legal counsel during interrogation. In Iran, 582 confirmed executions took place in 2023, with credible reporting suggesting the actual number was higher. Public hangings remain in use. In some documented cases, individuals were executed for crimes allegedly committed when they were under 18 years old. a practice explicitly prohibited under international law. The Iranian judicial system permits judges to apply tazir punishments, discretionary sentences that can include flogging, with documented cases of 80 to 100 lashes administered for offenses including alcohol consumption and extramarital relations. The physical act of flogging in Iranian courts is carried out with a cane or cable, delivered to the back in a controlled cadence, not with enough force to break skin in many cases, which sounds like a mercy until you understand that the psychological dimension, the public nature, the stripping and exposure and count is considered part of the punishment design. In North Korea, the punishment infrastructure is so total and so documented by defector testimony that it constitutes a category of its own. Camp 14, Camp 22, Camp 16. These are political prison camps where people are sent not for crimes they committed, but for the political classification of their families. A system of inherited guilt called guilt by association, or yonjwaje. If your grandfather was deemed an enemy of the state in 1955, your parents were assigned to a labor camp. You were born there. You will die there. You have never known anything outside the wire. Estimates of the population held in these camps range from 80,000 to 120,000 people at any given time. And former prisoners who have escaped and testified describe systematic forced labor, starvation rations, torture as a routine administrative tool, public executions of prisoners by other prisoners as a mechanism of collective compliance. Children born inside these camps are raised with no knowledge of an outside world and no legal status within North Korea itself, which means they do not formally exist. This is not ancient history. This is Tuesday. But here's where it gets more complicated, because the conversation about harsh punishment rarely stays cleanly on the other side of the world. The United States executes people too. 24 executions in 2023. The methods vary by state. Lethal injection is the most common, though the three-drug cocktail used in most protocols was designed by anesthesiologists in the 1970s and has been subject to repeated legal challenge because its actual effectiveness at preventing pain during death is disputed. In several documented cases, inmates showed physical signs of distress during execution that experts argued indicated awareness and suffering, despite the paralytic drug in the cocktail that prevents visible reaction. You are, in effect, potentially dying in agony while appearing peaceful because the second drug has frozen your muscles. Several states have reintroduced nitrogen hypoxia as an alternative, positioning it as more humane. Alabama carried out the first nitrogen hypoxia execution in January 2024. Witnesses described the inmate convulsing for several minutes before losing consciousness, which was not what the state had described would happen. The state called the execution a success. Oklahoma still has electrocution available as an alternative method. South Carolina reauthorized the electric chair in 2022, specifically because lethal injection drugs had become difficult to obtain due to pharmaceutical companies refusing to sell them for use in executions. The reasoning went, if we can't get the drugs, we'll use the chair. The electric chair delivers between 1,700 and 2,400 volts in a sequence designed to stop the heart, though the actual physiological sequence, brain death versus cardiac arrest, remains disputed. Autopsies of executed prisoners have documented internal burns, fractured vertebrae from muscular convulsion, and post-execution findings that some medical examiners argue are inconsistent with instantaneous painless death. And then there's the waiting. The average time spent on death row in the United States is 20 years. You are sentenced to death, and then you wait 2 decades, filing appeals, watching others die, waking every morning in a cell not knowing if this is the year the court runs out of reasons to delay. The psychological literature on death row syndrome, a recognized cluster of symptoms including severe anxiety, depression, and cognitive deterioration, describes it as a distinct form of torture layered on top of the eventual execution itself. You die twice, once slowly over 20 years, once officially on a Tuesday morning in a room with witnesses. Across the border, in a different legal tradition, things look different, but not always better. Mexico officially abolished corporal punishment, but in practice, police torture during interrogation is so thoroughly documented that human rights organizations have tracked thousands of complaints over the past 2 decades. The instruments used include the tehuacanazo, forced inhalation of mineral water mixed with chili powder through the nose, electric shocks applied to genitals, suffocation with plastic bags, and suspension from ceilings by bound wrists. These are not isolated incidents from rogue officers. These are documented patterns consistent across jurisdictions, occurring in federal as well as state facilities, used most frequently to extract confessions before trial in a legal system where confession carries evidentiary weight. In Singapore, caning is a mandatory sentence for at least 42 offenses, including drug trafficking, robbery, and certain immigration violations. The rattan cane is 1.2 meters long and approximately 1.27 centimeters in diameter. It is soaked in water to prevent splitting. The strokes are delivered by a trained officer in full force, and the cane breaks the skin. Medical staff attend the punishment to ensure the recipient remains conscious throughout. If you lose consciousness, the remaining strokes are administered at a later date once you have recovered. The maximum is 24 strokes. The scars are permanent. Singapore defends this openly, with government officials arguing that the practice is a deterrent and citing low crime rates as evidence of its effectiveness. The causality of that argument is disputed by criminologists, but Singapore isn't asking. In Qatar, flogging remains a legal punishment. In Malaysia, judicial caning is carried out in prisons and can be applied for dozens of offenses, including immigration violations, which means a person who entered the country without documentation can be sentenced to caning before deportation. In Indonesia's Aceh province, public canings are carried out for offenses under Sharia law, including gambling, extramarital relations, and same-sex conduct. The canings happen in public squares after Friday prayers and are attended by crowds. Local officials have defended them as both morally necessary and pedagogically useful, particularly for the young people in the audience. Children watch. That's the point. What connects all of these is not geography or religion or economic development. What connects them is a theory of punishment that is as old as civilization and as unresolved as any question humans have ever tried to answer. Does making the consequence terrible enough prevent the behavior? The research on deterrence is among the most replicated findings in criminology, and the consistent answer is nuanced in a way that policy rarely accommodates. Severity of punishment has almost no measurable deterrent effect beyond a threshold. Certainty of punishment, the likelihood of being caught, has significant deterrent effect, which means that a system designed around maximally harsh punishment is probably not deterring crime more effectively than a system designed around consistent enforcement. It's just hurting people more. But deterrence was never the only point. There's incapacitation. If someone is in a cell, they can't commit crimes outside it. There's retribution, not as deterrence but as a value in itself. The idea that justice requires that wrongdoing be answered with proportionate suffering, an idea embedded in legal philosophy from Hammurabi to Kant. And there's something that rarely gets named directly in policy discussions, but that drives more of this than anyone wants to admit, which is the appetite of a society to see pain administered to those it has designated as outside its circle of concern. That's the mechanism that makes the system durable. Not the criminals, not the policies, not the politicians. You, not you specifically, but the aggregate of you, the social permission that ordinary people extend or withdraw. Public executions persist in part because publics attend them.